Hi, this is Greg. Look for my book, The Agile Brand, on Amazon or on my website at theagile.world. Welcome back to the Agile World. This is Greg Kihlstrom. I've been talking about the 5 things that I talk about in my book about what sets an Agile brand apart. Last episode, I talked about having an open dialogue with customers, and that's everything from receiving complaints online, particularly on social media in a very public forum, and what do you do with it, and how great brands are able to respond and sometimes diffuse a situation or create an opportunity out of a customer asking for something. Today, I'm going to talk about telling genuine stories. And I think that's such a storytelling is such an important part of a great brand, but the risk you run is if your story isn't true, if it doesn't feel right to the audience, it actually runs a risk of a negative impact. So I use an example in my book, The Agile Brand, of Oldsmobile. So again, I use a lot of car examples for one reason or another. But so Oldsmobile, the brand doesn't exist anymore. But back in the 90s, they were kind of trying to find their place in the world. So they were one of many brands at General Motors, kind of in between Pontiac and Buick and Cadillac, didn't really have a place. And yet they had a loyal following. They had people that they just bought Oldsmobiles since whenever. Honestly, I don't know the date, but since whenever Oldsmobiles existed, they were buying them. Loyal fans, let's say, of the brand, and it was never a sexy brand. It was never super cool, super hip, but there were people that consistently bought them. But Oldsmobile wanted to appeal to a younger demographic. I used this example with Scion and Toyota in the last episode, but or a similar example. But so all of a sudden, Oldsmobile, they wanted to rebrand themselves as not your father's Oldsmobile. So they had a few new models out, and they looked a little different, but really at the end of the day, they were Oldsmobiles. So they did this campaign, featured a number of celebrities, Ringo Starr, William Shatner, featured them alongside their daughters. And so the whole premise of the campaign was, again, not your father's Oldsmobile. It's as appealing to the daughter of the famous actor or musician as it is to their daughter. So sure enough, it didn't really succeed so well. So, I don't think they really sold any more cars to that younger demographic. And even worse, they alienated their core audience, these older people that were buying these Oldsmobiles and perfectly happy with them. They weren't really complaining about the cars in the first place. They weren't looking for, again, a young, sexy car. They wanted an Oldsmobile because they knew what it delivered. There's a quote from a guy, Zach Estrada, that says it well. He says, "Even for a 90s ad for a Cutlass Supreme, it's hopelessly corny. The long-term damage was said to be with the fact that it alienated existing Oldsmobile buyers. Worst of all, it screamed that Olds was desperate to be cool again. And we saw how that turned out." So, sure enough, they were telling a story. They were trying to tell a new story that this car was trying to appeal to a new generation, but it fell flat with their existing audience. It fell flat with their new audience. I think more recently, there's been a few other examples of this. I think a few years ago, Starbucks did a campaign called Race Together, where the baristas wrote a question about race on their coffee cups, and it's one of those things that it just didn't feel right. And sure enough, within a week, the campaign was pulled. It was an attempt at Starbucks trying to enter a dialogue about race in the U.S. And sure, while admirable, it didn't feel right. And one of the reasons why it doesn't feel right is that's not the kind of conversation that you generally have with your barista. I go to Starbucks quite often. I drink a lot of coffee, and I might even get to know a barista at a Starbucks if I go there, often and at the same time or something like that. But I am never going to engage in a politically or socially charged discussion with them while I'm ordering my grande dark roast. So I think, that's one of those things where, again, Starbucks was trying to make a play on values and all of that. It wasn't even something that is against their values. I think they've demonstrated since then that they're committed to um, being more equitable when it comes to race and things like that. But it fell flat because it just wasn't genuine, and it wasn't a genuine conversation that you would have. So I think for brands to really tell a good story, you really have to think about what are your core values, what do people want to hear from you on, and what can you weigh on meaningfully. I think Nike did a much better job of that with the Colin Kaepernick advertising, and while that was certainly charged, and there was some negative backlash from some people with that, I think it was a lot more in line with their core values. I mean, their tagline, "Just do it," that they've been using for years and years. I think that stance that they took, certainly it was a calculated stance. I'm sure they ran the numbers and made sure that they weren't going to lose their entire customer base before they did that. But I think taking that stance was a lot more in line with their values. And sure enough, the statistics I've heard, their sales went up. They suffered no negative repercussions. Actually, it made their core audience actually a lot more committed to the brand. So there's certainly great ways that you can do that, and it doesn't always have to be about social issues. But those are a few examples that that I think really kind of demonstrate both the bad and the good. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about using data to drive deeper insights and greater growth. Thanks for listening. See you next week. If you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, please rate the show on iTunes or contact me through my website at theagile.world. You can find my books, The Agile Brand and The Agile Web, on Amazon and on my website at theagile.world.